All right. If you don't know where it came from, don't scan it. Uh, Ryan, I think that's good advice in general. Like, I don't pick up food I don't know where it came from either and eat it. But welcome to the show, man. I'm glad to have you here. Tell us a
Yeah, I'm
little bit
super happy to
about
be here. Yeah,
yourself. Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for PAX8, right? Help people understand what your expertise is.
sure. Yeah, so I'm Ryan. I've been here at PAX8 for 6-8 months, something like that. I'm kind of losing time. This place is super fast moving, and we're doing a lot of
Goes
great
quick.
things. Yes, it does. But yeah, my role here is Senior Director of Security Architecture, and I take on a few different teams. So I run the Security Architecture team, where we're really highly focused on identity. We're really highly focused on cloud infrastructure and making sure that PAX8 is building the right things at the right time for the right purposes and the right reasons. And we're really focused on delivering quality at that level. The other side of the house that I work on too is the security engineering side, where my team is building the kind of operational equipment to run a security program within PAX8. So our alert data pipelines, our triage queues, managing our SIM, managing our CSPM, managing our EDR, and all of the different components that we use to secure our enterprise. So doing both sides of that, and it's a really rewarding position to be in, and I've been doing this sort of work for a while, and I frankly love it.
I actually have a side tangent question based on that introduction. I know that's surprising for most listening. But what's interesting is you just described being both on the architectural application end of things, but also involved in the day-to-day engineering and operations, which is interesting because does that give you in your mind better context of the challenge by being in that bridge gap position? And is that unique to you, or is that the way you've always functioned?
It's funny. The last few positions I've been in, it has been very similar. Although I think at larger enterprises, they do a really big, they really drive home the kind of the three different functions, which is planning and building and operating, right? Those three different pillars of a security
Sure.
program and doing those things. Whereas, we're a mid-sized business. I mean, we're a couple thousand employees. We're global. We're doing those things. We don't need that depth. Like, we have architects and we have engineers, and we can kind of put those together. Now, granted, we still have a really large and growing operations team. So from a security operations perspective, all of the alerts management and all of the things that
Sure.
are coming up
The
from our tools.
consumption and tactical pieces of it and
Yes,
operational
exactly.
facility. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
That's cool. Interesting. I just had some thoughts that might make you better at your job by having the context of what those things mean as it extends out in that as a translator in my mind. One of the things that I wanted to tackle today, and the reason for you here, is we're going to be talking about some terms, CSPM, cloud security posture management, but also other things. And we're going to be demonstrating a platform. Again, for anybody that's watching, we're trying to make this more kinesthetic and more demonstrative of actual things that we're doing in our world. And so I've asked Ryan to prepare a slide deck to kind of tackle what it looks like to use a posture management tool and what that means. I'll also preface it and just get your thoughts, Ryan, real quick on this, is that when we're talking about pen testing, a traditional environment that is infrastructure based, that is traditionally housed, has a very linear and infrastructural path to it. It also has this alinear nature that you can make mistakes here and there that string together. They can be all kinds of different models, and they're hard to predict. And sometimes it takes that human nature to actually identify those. When you take that to cloud and cloud-centric aspects, you almost get to where I've heard my colleagues call it a cloud configuration check, not a pen test in some
Yeah.
cases, right? And so I'd love your thoughts on that kind of just exposition of cloud versus infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, historically working in some smaller kind of data centers. So way back in the day, I worked at a mortgage company, and we had a couple data centers that were connected with fiber, and we managed both sides of it. It was active. We had firewalls on both
Sure.
sides. We had a DMZ. We had these things that were publicly exposed that pen testers could go attack, and so could attackers. And the reality is in the cloud environment is so much different now, right? Like, we're talking about configuration of buckets. We're talking about configuration of security groups and configuration of different, ingress paths into Kubernetes. And it is a far different environment. And the threats are being attacked by the same sorts of people that are trying to get in, but they're just done in many different ways. you got to remember too, it's all about money at the end of the day, it seems like. And,
Yeah,
if they can
it
get,
always is.
they can get software on there so that they can, mine Bitcoin or whatever it is, or, hold ransom some machines in your environment, like that's the end goal in many cases. And, cloud posture management systems are really designed to help security teams find those avenues, find those vectors, and really get them secured in a way that's quicker and easier to manage than kind of manually crawling through all this cloud infrastructure. Because it is, cloud
Yeah.
environments it's not a list of firewall rules, as you called out. Like this is the plethora of configurations among many different services. And having many different services, they can tie together in many different ways, and you can have many different vectors through those different paths. So
Yeah.
it's a different thing.
What's interesting too about it, though, just to be a little more theoretical, is just that because it is so broad, it's also in the same right, though, very normalized, right? In the same that a bucket has the same inspection points. I can check to see how it's configured. Is there a SaaS token option? Is it open? Those things are all normalized, yet broad and interconnected, fairly normalized in the way they interconnect, in the ways they can. Now, infrastructure side aside, not to get too far in the weeds, but the point being is that it's just really big to try to manage all that. And you and I were talking before the show, one of the big challenges is just we don't have a brain as a human to go, oh, that GUID that has a W in the 13th place instead of an R versus this. I see how those interconnect. That's tough as a human, right? to map together anyways. Yeah, continue.
Yeah, no, it's really difficult. And historically, like in the cloud kind of processing environment, really good CSPM tools haven't really existed. Like there's some
Right.
new tools that are out there, and we'll talk about a few of them that have kind of turned this into a magical thing from a security operations standpoint. Like I can integrate a bunch of different cloud environments, and it doesn't just have to be one cloud provider anymore. I can have a company that has 3 different cloud providers, and they're all configured in different ways and doing different things, and all of my issues and all of my findings can land into one set of dashboards. And what's frankly really amazing about these tools is instead of looking at it from just a cloud perspective, some of these tools look and account for all of your cloud environments and can show you pivot points between your different clouds. So it's like if you're running a Microsoft shop and you've got some Azure and you've got some AWS, and there's something that exists and that is an interconnect between the two, it can identify that and show you potential vectors and potential risks around that as well. So it's become quite magical, and really seeing these tools operate in the modern space it's been amazing. This is probably one of the highlights of my career, is being able to get these tools deployed and going, how do they do all this magic, right? Like this used to be like hours and hours of Python code, and like, how do I look at this and pull this in and create this array and map these things together? Now it's just like you deploy it and you're like, how did they do that? That is beautiful and magical all at the same time.
Well, then let's give the people what they want, and let's just show it. I think that was the whole intention of this, is to do exactly that. So why don't you kind of give some of examples of what you mean by that?
Yeah, totally. So again, my role here is architecture and engineering. So one of the first things that I wanted to do at Pax8 is get a really modern CSPM or CNAP tool rolled out to the enterprise. And that includes rolling it out to all of our different cloud environments and making sure that I'm seeing all the critical findings, all the high findings, and pulling everything into one set of dashboards, so that instead of my engineers crawling out across multiple clouds and looking at multiple sources and trying to pull everything into, say, a SIM and look for all the different elements that are coming together, this becomes the central point for configuration management, or posture management, if you will. So the tool that we're talking about today is Wiz, although there are many really good ones out there. And I don't want to just say this is the only one. I will say that I'm happy jumping different tools over the years just to make sure that, like we're looking at the same ones. I'm not proposing this as the answer. I'm just saying that this is the one that we're using. But Wiz and Orca, and there's Lacework, and there's several others out there that may fit your organization really well. But this is the CSPM, the Wiz dashboard, the overview page, if you will. And it might be small and hard to see, but some of the major things that you're going to see here are kind of your top issues and issues over time, and the SLAs around tracking these particular issues and how long it's taken you to fix them. It's also going to show you kind of compliance and mapping you to different frameworks like Kubernetes and like CIS and other different frameworks out there, and you kind of show your compliance level with those and how you're improving over time. And that's the big thing for me, is like, how am I improving? How am I solving these issues? And am I prioritizing the right ones at the right time? But I will say, once you get these tools deployed, this becomes one of your starting day points. And it's a really nice thing to have. Like I pull open this dashboard, I'm like, did anything pop last night? Are we seeing any
Sure.
new critical findings, any new high findings? What are they, and how do they map to the rest of the infrastructure? And I will pause and say, having this is great, but you need to have a really good, what I like to coin the term as I've coined it as alert data pipeline. So we have all these alerts coming from all these different tools, right? And we have all these teams across this enterprise that need information about these alerts in real time or as close to real time as possible. So you need to have that construct of an alert data pipeline where this tool, this CSPM, can generate a finding or an alert and can provide all the enrichment and context around it and deliver it to the right teams at the right time.
Right.
So having that in place is really important too. But this tool glued to that process is just a beautiful thing.
Do you, side tangent real quick, which comes first? The alert pipeline process or the CPSM or CSPM methodology that's going to generate that actionable alert set that has to be figured out where it goes?
Well, I think different enterprises may approach it differently, but I will say that from my my historical standpoint, working at I've worked at a few different SaaS companies, Red Canary, and then also Ping Identity. I've worked there, and I've done very similar things.
That's a good set of track record, by the way, for tools that I've used in my life. So yeah,
nice.
If I'm on any vote in that case, but the Atomic Red team is fantastic, man. I don't know.
Oh my goodness, right? Like those guys that have
Yes.
generated that tool. That's a whole tangential topic there. Like some of the most amazing and creative people I've met have developed that platform and that set of tools. Anyway, what comes first? Like, do you get your alerts to your people first, or do you go and generate a stack of alerts that's inactionable because you don't have a path to talk to your employees? So in my standpoint, I always like to build a really flexible alert data pipeline first, meaning I'm getting all the alerts from all the different tools and I'm enriching them and I'm making sure that they're clean and they're digestible by the people that need to digest it before I really focus on tool deployment, because you need that solid business process in place. I need to communicate to the marketing team that they've exposed an S3 bucket or they've exposed something that they need to change. I need to communicate
and a path to hold them accountable and a path to validate the business case for these discussions. Like all of those things have to be in place.
And it's all about growth. It's all about positivity. It's all about making good improvements to the security program over time. And I feel that communicating to the people in the way they like to be communicated with is really important. So instead of saying our system uses email and it's going to email you in the morning of any new security alerts and forcing that down somebody's throat, if the team operates primarily out of Slack, like say a DevOps team, they may want to digest those alerts in Slack. Or if you have a marketing team, they're not in Slack, they're not doing those things, they're not at that, they're not using those tools. You need to be communicating with them.
So it's meet the people where they are. Right?
That's right.
And to your point, it's establishing what efficacy of these alerts is going to happen as I do that. So assuming that's established, and I didn't mean to take us down that rabbit hole, even though I'd love to do it for like 20 hours. Back to now that we're getting into, let's get to the alerts, the actionable alerts around CSPM, and back to the original topic. So you were showing this dashboard, and some of the things that immediately stood out to me are some terms we might need to learn. Earlier, you said threat. And we've talked about vulnerabilities and we see findings. Help me understand some of those things, whichever one you want to tackle.
Yeah, let's kind of start at the base of this. Like when you deploy a CSPM tool, what does it do? It tackles many different things. So it plugs into the cloud infrastructure and starts reading all of your cloud configuration. Well, then it's also doing some other things. It might be scanning the data in your S3 buckets, looking for potentially identifiable information. It might be looking for financial data or health data, whatever it may be. It's going to be scanning also your EBS volume. So any of your virtual machines that are out there, or your virtual disk, I will say EBS for AWS and everything else for everything else, but your virtual disks, right? It's going to be scanning those disks, looking for potential malware signatures. It's also going to be looking for really unique things like keys. Like if I know this server has this set of keys on it, does that change the posture of it? Does that change the risk evaluation of it? And these modern tools are looking at all of these things collectively to help provide context around risk. And I'll show some of that in a different slide here. But so I'll say from a finding standpoint, the findings are the raw things. It's like this package is deployed on that machine, so thus it has this CVE. Okay, great, right? Does that mean that you need to go patch it right away? Maybe, maybe not. But the context around the finding bubbles up into what they call an issue. So,
and I think I understood you to say the first thing it's trying to do is build the framework of what data is out there. Like, what are the servers, what could house it, and then it's trying to find context to try to understand the value of those platforms, at least in its first cursory pass of looking for things like what data is there. Is there PHI? To your point, like keys, right? Those are in AAK, AASI, AKI, right? Or whatever the different key formats are. And so they're discoverable, right? And so it's trying to build that context of like, this is worth more because it has 47 keys on it. And that's that first pass it's trying to do. Is that a fair kind of statement there?
Absolutely. So you'll get a tool like this deployed, and the initial scans typically occur overnight. Like, that's when you'll configure them, because they're pretty heavy from an API perspective. They're nailing the API. They're looking at all the different things. They're creating snapshots of everything and scanning all these disks. It's not like an instant process. It takes time.
Sure.
And that's from a posture management standpoint. So that's where you're pulling in all of the posture findings and mapping them all together. And then by next morning, when you start your day, you've got a dashboard of these findings, and then bubbled up from the findings, it's important to say, you've got your findings, which are all of the things, and then you have your issues. And that's where the gold is, right? Like, okay, we have these 6 findings that are all collectively, put together like a publicly exposed instance with these ports running this particular web server with this particular vulnerability, and maybe that server has these keys on it. Those keys might be associated with some other environment. Like, it pulls all that together so you can understand the actual business risk from it versus it just has a vulnerability, right? So it's really pulling all that together. So issues and findings, that's the big thing from this particular tool.
And issues might be some of those vulnerabilities, to your point, and then findings are, hey, now this means something, right? And that's kind of that point of being actionable. And also goes along with what we were talking about with your alert pipeline, right? Because now it means that the alerts coming from this should be more actionable and more prioritized, right? As by that definition of, hey, now not only that. The other thing we tackled that we didn't really get into, and I love asking my guests this when they use a word, and it's kind of like the old wrestling move, like you got to tap it before you use it kind of thing, right? So, sorry if I'm just showing my age and redneckness, but the point is that you said threats, and we talked about this before the show, and Jeff Mann was a guy in the early NSA Red team, and he just lost his stuff one day at RSA, and he and I sat down and just defined words for 45 minutes. It was fantastic. But when he talks about threats, what is a threat to you, Ryan? What's different about a threat from a vulnerability, per se, or a finding from an issue, per se?
Yeah, I think that's a great segue. Like, well, we'll talk about a vulnerability. Like, what is a vulnerability first? Well, it is a path that an attacker could exploit to get to something, to do something, to change something, to use that vulnerability to do something. When that vulnerability gets exploited, then there's a threat, right? And that's the way that I evaluate that. It's it's a runtime threat. It's an attacker has pivoted and is now in your infrastructure, or maybe they're moving laterally, or maybe whatever it is. But detecting a threat is an actual attacker, that is an actual human in most cases, doing something malicious within your infrastructure. There's your threat, right? And that's what I look at. So when you say you find a threat, like that's yes. Yeah, and you were explaining it earlier in a beautiful way too, if you wanted to cover that.
Yeah, I like to say, when we talk about vulnerabilities, I, by being a human, and I'm not a robot, I am a human, but I, by being a human, am vulnerable to bullets. I am a bag of flesh, and bullets are moving fast, they have a high mass and density, lots of kinetic energy, and they go through me. It's not great. But that is not a threat, right? A vulnerability is my weakness to bullets. A threat is somebody picking a gun and shooting me has now become an active threat that is now actually targeted and taking advantage of my vulnerable nature to bullets, right? And so vulnerabilities are not kinetic. They are typically potential state, whereas a threat is an actual active piece. And I just want to make sure we're speaking, because what you're trying to do is, with the CSPM, find the vulnerabilities that have a higher weight, that if a threat actor was to threat, then this would have this outcome, right? And so you can determine what actions to take. Anything to add to that?
No, I think that's exactly right. Hold on one second here. I love this. I will say that my machine is actively patching, so if it goes down and I lose the slides,
awesome.
I apologize. This is the reality of living in the world of
We have reduced vulnerabilities
security.
Right here in some small kinetic
That's
way.
right.
I just wanted
I'm
to
gonna
say
do my
that's
way.
our jam.
Okay, I'm going to do my best to make sure this thing doesn't reboot. But if it does, I will lean on you guys for help here. But Yeah, I think that issues and threats and findings and bubbling that all together really talks, to the value of making sure that you have a really good alert data pipeline to pass the things that matter to the people that matter to get them fixed. And that's my job as a
Yeah.
security practitioner. It's like, I am here to make sure that these things reduce business risk across the board, and making sure that the right people know about these things as quickly as possible in a way that they communicate, right? And CSPM, these sets of tools, Wiz in particular is interesting. So you have this CSPM stack, right? We've talked about vulnerabilities, we've talked about issues, we've talked about threats, we've talked about all these things. There's also the runtime element of this tool for threat detection. And that is unique. And what that really means is it's evaluating and streaming live data from your cloud. So specifically, I'll talk about AWS, CloudTrail, guard duty findings,
Yep.
and then also there's agents that run out in that infrastructure that are collecting network telemetry. They're collecting DNS lookups. They're collecting information about file modifications and outbound network connections to different systems. And it's pulling all of that together to give you purview or a light into runtime threats that are occurring. So with a tool like this, I get my nightly scanning findings of like, okay, there's another S3 bucket that I need to
Sure.
go look at, or maybe this EC2 is new and they didn't deploy it with the latest AMI or whatever it is. I go tackle those issues. But then there's the runtime threats, right? And those are real time.
Yeah.
And those could
Yeah.
be juicy. And making sure that the alert data pipeline is set up in such a way where this tool can send that data to those different paths is really critical. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would imagine there's also a nature of automation that can come from that too, right? Like certain critical workloads can have that be the entry point of SOAR or other orchestration methodologies that could exist for that threat, right? That could take action upon it. So that's interesting. Tell me a little bit more about the slides and the overview that you have here.
Yeah,
and kind of
totally.
delve into some of the components of it and what we're looking
I'll
at.
jump through it. There's only a limited number of slides here, so we can kind of jump through it, and you can ask me questions along the way. So
And the
Wiz
nature
also,
of it, for those that are watching, just so you know, I always ask to be very kinesthetic, and I want to work in a platform, but I also don't want fake CRUD data. So what we are seeing is actual data that Ryan
Yes.
has painstakingly redacted in a way that means something but still leaves us with the intent.
Right.
So that's the reason for slides, not a live platform today. This is OPSEC 101. So anyways,
Yeah.
continue, Ryan.
like when you're saying, hey, let's show me a CSPM and what it can do. Well, I'll show you what it can do in our environment and the things that it sees, but I got to make sure that I'm showing slides that are from like demo environments and things like that where I don't lead on something and an
Exactly.
attacker can find a vulnerability because I'm telling them
Exactly.
about it, right? Like that's not my job today. But from an entitlement perspective, like in the cloud, there's so many different ways personas or identities can gain access to different things. Like you can have an EC2 system that has a role attached, and that role might give access to S3 or might give access to KMS to get secrets or whatever it is, or decrypt data. So this entitlements view is really focused on showing weaknesses around your entitlements. Like maybe you have a role that's over provisioned. Maybe you have an administrator function or a role or an identity that hasn't been used in a period of time. It can be cleaned up.
Yeah.
So the focus here and the visibility here is like, hey, what are you doing from your entitlements perspective? And what are the risks from those identities and those particular systems and the access that they have? So that's
Yeah.
here. These views,
And if
by
we're
the way,
tackling this, if we're tackling this from a CIS perspective, just for anybody that is trying to go down that practitioner lens, right? Like in CIS, he just tackled control 5 dot, I think it is 3, like disabled dormant accounts. He just tackled the high 6s around access control, principle of least privilege, trimming access, understanding the breadth of access. So when you're talking about entitlements, like just understand that there is an actual kinesthetic representation, or a kinetic representation of what you're learning in CIS that then applies to what you're actually doing in these platforms. Like this is the way I'm doing access review for dormant accounts. Why? Because I have an API key that hasn't been used, that exists, that has God mode rights. I want to know why. Why hasn't it not been used in 45 days or more as per the call out in the safeguard? So Ryan, just wanted to make sure people knew as well that this is a way of managing two frameworks by actually doing this in the operations. Anyway, sorry, I love those moments. But
Yeah, no worries. I believe identity is the core of everything in modern compute. Like that is the absolute core
I'm done
of
here.
how you
I'm
run
out.
your business, right?
that's it. No
And-
more need for me.
It's good that I'm talking to you. I'm glad we're on the same page here because you
Yeah,
do find
100%.
security practitioners that are more old school and they focus on network and things like that. And I'm really focused
Yeah.
on zero trust and device identity and human
Oh,
identity, and making sure that you pull all that together in a realistic way. And in this, again, in this view, we're talking about identities in the cloud, which could be roles that are
yep.
assumed. It could be humans that are there. But yeah, that's that. Kind of jumping forward is the next view. So this kind of gives you another light of what Wiz is looking at. And this is looking at the data security. So it's looking at your S3 buckets. It's looking at any of your file shares that you have hanging off of AWS or Azure or GCP. And it's looking at all of those for a few things. It's looking from an access perspective, but it's also looking at them from what type of data exists in there.
Yeah.
Is it usernames? Is it emails? Is it financial data? Is it PHI? What is it? And all of that collectively can get rolled back up into what we talked about earlier, which is issues. So you have all these different findings, and some of the findings are maybe sensitive data, right? And that could elevate the risk of an issue. But this view is specifically sliced out looking at data security. So CSPM or CNAP tools these days are also doing kind of that, data scanning thing, where it's trying to find particular data points that are risky so that you can evaluate your risk posture a little bit better. Like, oh, do I go tackle this in this lab environment, or do I go tackle, these healthcare findings that I have in an S3 bucket? Like, prioritize. It helps you prioritize.
Do you see that being a bit of crossover of other work that already exists for data management platforms? Like, you're already seeing a lot of those exist that do data classification, data codification, things like that. And it seems like in this case, they're fairly infrastructural, right? At the agent and disk level and bucket level. Do you see this platform also scanning your function service and platform service type storage, like things like, the Dropboxes of the world, plus the, storage buckets, like you said, already infrastructurally? Do they bring that in, or is it mostly the infrastructure side?
It's going to be mostly infrastructure. So you're going to be mostly using a tool like this to not scan your Google Drives or your boxes of the world. You're going to be using it to scan your infrastructure, your AWS accounts, your Azure accounts, your GCP stuff. There's also many other integrations, and I don't want to downplay what Wiz can do, and they definitely can tie into many other things, and it's quite magical. Remember I used that word magical? I view these tools as magical.
Which us engineers don't toss around all that often, right? Because we're fairly practical. So yeah, that's fair. That's high praise, right? The magical part.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, this is the data security section, and I will say that I start my day looking at most of these dashboards real quickly. But I also understand that my alert data pipeline has already consumed the important things from this tool and has already delivered it to my work queues for my team to go operate on. It's in some
operational timeline based on whatever that status was in process,
Exactly. But taking a look at these things also teaches me more about the environment that I'm new to. Like, again, I told you guys, I've only been at PAX 8 for like 6-8 months, not that long. I'm still learning things here. And I'm still digging through these boards myself and going, oh, we should really focus on this and we should do these things. But so that's the data center or the data security stuff. The other thing that's really cool about these CSPM and CNAP tools is they have their own threat centers, right? And these threats are things that they're seeing in other customers' environments. And they're also kind of the top media things that you're learning about, like DigiCert revoking certificates and some ransomware that just recently hit, and Mirai botnet stuff. And there was the authorization bypass vulnerability in Docker that came out a couple weeks ago at this point. And that one was pretty serious too.
Vacation really I see very handily there that was last week, so I know about when you pulled these slides. So,
Right.
Exactly.
So this is cool, because what this does is it takes all of those big things that my CISO is going to ask me about, because he's going to hear about these things and people are talking about these things. And it goes and it looks across my entire environment and it tells me, hey, am I at risk with these certain things? With, I don't have to go digest these findings and really kind of think about what they're telling me here. Like, it tells me oh, in this account that you never look at that's in this lab, you have this Docker issue over here, or maybe you have this particular SSH vulnerability that came out a couple weeks ago. That was a fun time, right? Or maybe
regression.
The log4j days, all of those things would be here.
So, WebP, if I could keep bringing up horrible moments for all of us, but anyways.
But so the threat center. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
I lost you there. Okay.
First?
So, who's on first? So the threat center in Wiz really pulls together all those high different those big things that are coming out, and really tells my security team what's going on. And we actually subscribe to this in a Slack feed as well, so the team gets
Nice.
to hear about these real time. So do the other DevOps teams. So they go, oh yeah, like what, this thing just came out, and oh, by the way, you have these issues as well. Like it's
Yeah.
just awesome.
Well, and here's
right?
what this, to continue my analogy on this from earlier about the the weakness, vulnerability, threat conversation. This is exactly it. It'd be like, I would love to know that somebody is shooting people in the nearby area so that I can lock down. That is the threat continued, not to be macabre or even make light of shootings in that regard, so I apologize for anybody watching there. But the point being is, in this case, what this is doing is saying, hey, here's what we know is happening. Now, these green checks mean we've checked your environment. We're not seeing that happening here. We're good. We're not susceptible. We're not seeing this playing out. We're not seeing any evidence of that. And to your point, having that threat feed and having that heads up information as a practitioner is saying, hey, this is what you're going to start hearing about. And by the way, when your executive calls you and goes, Ryan, are we good here? You can go, green check. Yes, we're tested. We do have one lab environment that had this log4j or whatever you want to call it in that regard, right? And so threat feeds and the threat center is really trying to bring the context of your environment to bring awareness of what's happening from a threat actor out there actively using and exploiting things that are out there.
Right. And what's really nice about the threat center here is that if you have a publicly exposed, issue, one of these issues, it's going to be a higher risk for your business than is something that's, tied behind 3 different firewalls or whatever it may be in a private VPC. This tool's aware of that. So it's not like, hey, you have these issues for your whole thing. It's like, hey, these ones are really big and important, and these ones are there, and you need to fix them, but they are not going to get you owned in the next, 15 minutes when everybody learns about these things. So it's also, again, magical when your CISO comes up to you like high energy, and they're like, what's going on? Oh my God, is this a real problem? And you're like, well, no, we're good on this. We have these issues. It just really makes you sound like you know what you're doing, which feels really good. So again, magical is what I say about these sorts of
True
tools.
Story. Yeah, true story, for sure. It's about time to awareness. And one of the things I teach in a class that I do as well is one of the challenges we face is the time to weaponization challenge, right? And you kind of hinted at that just a second ago. Like from the time of a POC or a proof of concept to the time to weaponization is sometimes net negative. Right? And it's at the very best, very, very fast, right? From the time that a news article, and I said this in a class I was teaching, I was on a call talking about slash and grab, which if anybody's familiar with slash and grab, that was the recent Screen Connect vulnerability in which a trailing slash allowed you to reset up the user database of a server without having to lose all the connections to all those sweet, juicy endpoints, which meant I could just make myself a user account, lock out all the other accounts, and then take over and execute commands on all those machines. And so from when that first vulnerability was known in the inside channels to the point that it made POC was less than a day. It was like Thursday to Saturday. And from POC to weaponization and evidence of weaponization was less than Sunday. So my point is, and your point earlier, Ryan, of saying, when that high energy, where are we so that in 15 minutes when this becomes public, we're not pwned, is exactly what you're trying to get ahead of, right? Is that speed to weaponization that this type of platform both brings you the context of should I deal with this and interrupt production or follow our own response schedule that might be part of these things or not. And that awareness now has to happen in a much more compressed time frame, right? It's happening in a faster time frame from weaponization to realization of that, from realization to weaponization in that regard. So just a side thought on this, of what this helps with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good call out. Like you're trying to figure out these things, and again, it's all about business risk. It's all about stopping those threats that really impact your business and really can impact your revenues and impact your employee experience and impact your customer experience.
Your
right?
regulatory requirements, those
all
things.
of the good stuff, right? And you're trying to balance it all together. And I love tools like this, again, magical, because it really helps security practitioners get in front of many different areas. Is it the only one that we use? Certainly not. And can it be the only one that you use? Certainly not. But for a cloud posture perspective and looking at cloud infrastructure, these things are magical. But this screen here, this shows that it's true multi-cloud. So I've already hidden a ton of stuff on here. So you're like, oh, there's a bunch of blanks. Well, these are all
big blank area.
Right. The reason it's blank is because those are my cloud environments that I'm protecting. There's a ton of different AWS out here. There's a ton of different Azure. We've got GCP. We're going to get this thing tied into GitHub and some other places as well.
Ooh.
Like it can
CI/CD
really
pipeline.
pull together. Right. It can pull together all of those different findings again and bubble up the issues that matter to me. So when I say true multi-cloud, what I mean here is that it's tying those issues cross-cloud all together into findings.
Contextually aware.
Yes. And that makes my life really, really great because I'm chasing something down the path of like, what is this? Why is this? Oh, okay. It matters because of all these different reasons. And so yeah, it's true multi-cloud.
I'm super excited about what comes next because of that context. This slide. This is what makes me so excited. And actually, you know what? If anybody's in the chat, Disc Josh 23, Rob, Madman, JR Winsblog, any of y'all that are in the chat, if you know what this tool immediately reminds me of in my hacker blood, pun intended, then you can understand why this is so valuable in what we're looking at right now. So put it in the chat if you know what I'm talking about. If not, I'll give you the hint here in a little bit. But Ryan, what are we looking at here? What is so cool about this?
Yeah, so this is an issue, and what this one is saying is that publicly exposed VM or serverless function has a higher critical network vulnerability. And it has a known exploit. So, Wiz has already said, okay, it has a CV. There is a known exploit for it. And there's also components of this machine that would allude it to having kind of lateral movement if that thing was owned. So this is a real finding. It was in a lab environment here. So what I'm getting at here is this beautiful picture
Rob got
down
it.
here
Bloodhound. Yep, Rob
Nice
got
job.
it. 100%, Rob.
Nice
and I'm
job.
glad you're on our security team, Rob. So I'm glad you're the guy that got it.
Oh, my
excited.
boss is
That
here,
makes me
huh?
happy.
Ooh.
Yeah, well, my boss is here. I better get this one quickly. I digress.
Oh, now I'm even more stressed out. There we go. But yeah, okay. So attack path visualization. That's where these CSPM tools come to super value, in my opinion. And really, it's a graphical picture of the problem. And nothing speaks better to me as a security practitioner than an actual flow of what is wrong versus trying to piece together different text files or different CSVs or different whatever or different logs. This is an actual view to this threat. And I'll blow it up so it's a little bit bigger here. We can walk through it together. But on the left, you have the internet, right? So the internet is saying, okay, you have access to this particular EC2 system. And that particular EC2 system up here at the top, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor.
Yep,
Probably
we can see
not.
it.
But okay, cool. So findings at the top. Those are those CVEs that are associated with the particular software that's running on this. These particular findings were high and critical CVEs that could allow remote code execution, right? So you already see the vulnerability here. You have a server sitting on the internet with these CVEs that have a known exploit, right? And that system could be exploited with these particular vulnerabilities and these particular paths. Now, what gets really even more fun is that this particular system has access keys on it. And what are those access keys? Well, those access keys could probably be used for different things. Maybe they're used for S3 access so that the application can write something to an S3 bucket. Maybe they're used for something else. And granted, in most cases, like I would tell people, access keys are the devil and do not use them. Use role assumption wherever possible.
Yeah,
right?
so would Bo Bullock in his Breaching the Cloud class. So yeah, I would agree.
The basics, right? The basics. But those access keys you can see here are associated with an IAM user, of course. But that IAM user has the ability to assume these two administrative level roles. Meaning, if an attacker got those access keys, they could use those keys to pivot into an admin role. And the best part about it is that admin role is in another account. So tying all of that back together shows the lateral movement capabilities that
which
an
we see at
attacker
the bottom.
can use. Right. Yeah. And it's calling that out red, like, hey, this is lateral movement, right? So that's the value of Security Graph within Wiz.
Well, let's unpack
these
what's
tools
happening
do
here,
this.
though. There's something that's really valuable here that people aren't thinking about. This also speaks towards this component of JIT-GIA understanding, right? JIT-GIA means just in time, just enough access. It has this understanding of not only is that a key, but it has access to become a bigger key in an easy elevation of another account, right? So it's contextually aware, right? That's the big point of why these type of systems are so valuable, is they're able to say that key means that I'm this user and I have this capabilities with this key, and I now can use that to escalate to here. And so the point is it's aware of that in time and in conditional moment of access that isn't directly and immediately apparent. Immediately apparent is I have access to this SaaS bucket. What isn't immediately apparent is that access is actually an identity token for this user that has the ability to escalate to this thing. And in Bo Bullock's Breaching the Cloud, if you haven't taken that course and you're a practitioner, definitely recommend it. It is beautiful to see that abuse in action. And I actually got to lab that using exactly that abuse. So not only is this that issue, it's also something I've actually gotten to do and see how this is so abusive. So yeah, very good call out. That's cool.
Yeah, this is good stuff, right? So again, from a practitioner standpoint, or just me doing my general thing of looking at things, this tells me that this is a big issue, right? And I have a lot more context. So when I go talk to my engineers about it, or I go talk to the team that owns this system, I can sit down and I can educate on many different elements here. Like, hey, there's probably a patching issue here, right? Like we have these vulnerabilities that have been solved. Maybe we should patch these things. Another thing that I could look at is, why is this system even publicly exposed, right? Maybe there's a better way to control access to that front door, right? So maybe we should talk about that. And the access key element that's here. So those static credentials that are on disk on this machine that were discovered by the CSPM tool. Maybe there's a better way to implement that access pattern for this particular system. I say role assumption, right? And then, looking at the actual, policies that are associated with those secret keys, why do they have access to, gain access to an administrative role? Like, why does that user have access to assume a role as an admin? That's a huge risk, right? Like, why do you allow in your environment a lower user to step up into an administrative user and not have good controls to prevent that? So there's so many different things that I see from this view, because we've been doing this a while. Security practitioners do this day in and day out, and having a visualization tool just makes life so much better, right? Like it's no longer scrolling through all these different findings and looking at logs and looking at JSON policy statements. This is just a much easier work experience, right? Like this makes you happy.
There's a second path that you're not covering here too, not just your side, but I take back, I've been doing a CIS mapping exercise with a bunch of practitioners. One of the first things we had to do was make these visuals. And the reason for the visuals was it was just too much nuance to try to explain the delineation of how something was used and have everybody follow you in that, right? Imagine having to say, no, let me show you this AWS key. Okay, it's permanent. No, let me show you what user. Now, hold on this chart over here, let me show you where the journey to take someone to understanding and acceptance of what you're trying to say is also much shorter when it's visual. Right? You can take it to another executive that may or may not have all of the deep practitioner background of understanding it and gain convincing understanding that we're all on the same page. At least a logic flaw has not been interpreted large enough to step it out because you have a visual. You can just point to it and go, here's this, how it's connected to that, and how it's connected to that. And so I think there's a simplification for you, but there's a simplification for the non-you too, in my opinion, of trying to get buy-in.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I sit down with the team and I go, hey, this is your system and these are the issues with it, I don't have to try to... Understanding everything that we talked about there requires a lot of security background. You have to be doing this for a while. Yeah. With a tool like this, and you can show them this picture, you hit the nail on the head, which is, this is the problem. And they go, oh, I totally understand, right? Drawing on a whiteboard is such a powerful thing, and that's what this tool is doing for you, really. And having that is just 100% awesome.
And that it's defensible, which is the other side we haven't unpacked too, of in some degrees as a professional, there's so much you as Ryan have to know. Even as an executive leading a team of people that have to know things is tough. And when you start getting into platforms like this, when it goes cloud, and we'll go into this next one, it does give you the ability to defend your actions based on the playbooks that have been provided in a normalized way to you, right? Like that's the other side of this too that's valuable.
Yeah. Absolutely. So one of the elements here is that this whole thing is an experience in and of itself. So you can drill into these different elements and get more information. So every one of these little cells that you see, or those little blobs that are there, I can click on it and I can learn more about it. Like, what is this role? What rights does it have? What are these CVEs? Are there exploits to them? What are their ratings for these particular CVEs? Yeah. So this just shows me clicking on that, the CVEs and extrapolating what all of those CVEs are, so I can go and actually look at them and figure out what they are and what their criticality is. I can go test abusing them myself to see if I can actually gain access to the system through these different methods or these different vectors. And again, really powerful, right? So you can not only get this static view, but you can get this dynamic view where you're really digging into it and learning more about it.
And you're getting that view both from the lens of on the OS and also on something that is reaching to the OS, right? So you get that same, like I use Nessus for what we're doing for a lot of scanning for the hackening. And in that case, I have only this outward view and what's externally exposed. With platforms like this, because they natively see the new workload, they natively start scanning it with agents inside that network or inside the actual function services of cloud services, metadata, methodologies, things in that nature. So you're getting a more holistic view of what's actually actionable, in my opinion, in this type of a model from what at least in my small experience comparatively.
Yeah, vulnerability scanning is a unique monster in and of itself, right? Like you hit an interesting point where you're talking about using a system or a network scanning tool to go scan another system, right? And you're gaining a light of what is externally available from that other system, right? So you can only see kind of partial findings, if you will, or what's publicly exposed through that. A tool like a CSPM doesn't use an agent to go scan these things. What it's doing is it's actually taking a snapshot of the server disk, and it's looking at that bit by bit across this disk for not only sensitive data, but for what is installed on it and what are the versions associated with it. And it also has an understanding of the runtime, like what ports are exposed and what's on those things, and it can see all of that as well. So pretty magical, right? Like you can, again, magical, but tools like this, it really makes my job pretty easy because I can see everything, and I can, you take a deep breath at the end of the day, and you have a little bit more feeling that you know what you're working with.
That you're not fighting a constantly emptying sandbox. You know where the sand level is. Like you got some degree of understanding of what's coming out the bottom end. Eddie Phillips also said to our earlier point, I don't know if we can bring that up on YouTube or if that's on a different YouTube, but explaining tools is way more difficult than using a visual as it speaks to a wide spectrum of audiences. And I love that that's what this type A platform like this, I don't want to make this a complete Wiz article. And if so, Wiz, you can send your checks to PAX 8, Quebec Street.
I'll take one.
Anyways, he'll take one of mine. But Eddie, you're right. And if we get something that makes that easier to do, and then also to your point, Ryan, I can drill into the data. I can get data as a nerdy bit if I want more nerdy bits, but I can also see and understand the path in a less nerdy bit way that's easy to function without me having to draw it up. And when I draw, just so y'all know, it is definitely Beautiful Minds. Like when I'm like, no, it's like, and you got to see this does it in a way that's more Bloodhound-esque that helps you understand the path, right, to the point earlier. So great call out, Eddie. Thank you.
Yeah. So the last part of it is, this is my last slide here, but this is the very last slide I got for you, but it's talking about just outbound alerting. Like, what are the capabilities of the system for notifying the people? And in this case, there's Slack integration via Slackbot. So you can get highly granular with what you display in these and what you're sending and all the data around it. You're providing contextual links back to the findings. You're providing contextual links to the actual resource in the cloud that's the problem. And you can see right there, that makes your life so much easier as a security engineer. Like, pop, here's this alert. Oh, here's the finding in Wiz, or the issue in Wiz. And here's the actual cloud resource. Click on that. Now I'm looking at the cloud resource. Now I'm looking at the CSPM tool. Pretty magical, right? Like, it just makes your life from a workflow perspective a lot better.
Now, one last piece of this is because of how much this has and how much context it has, one might imagine one should set access to these types of platforms based on that said sensitivity. Is that a pretty fair statement? Anything to add to that, or any thoughts on that?
Yes. The beauty with these things is you start pulling in all the cloud environments, and there's the notion, so Wiz calls it deployment. So you're deploying Wiz into your different environments. Once it's deployed, there are subscriptions within those environments. So let's say from an AWS perspective, you have an AWS org, and in that org you have 100 accounts, let's say. In some cases more, some cases maybe less. Some of those accounts might be associated with production. Some of those accounts might be associated with development. Some might be just straight up testing accounts that are garbage. Some might be management accounts. Wiz gives you the ability, and so do other CSPM tools, to slice those subscriptions or those accounts up into different buckets they call projects. And then you can assign access to those projects based upon SSO and either skim provisioning or different group provisioning, group mapping, and make sure that the right people, the right people have access to the right data within the tool. So that way, if I have a systems engineer, say on DevOps, and they log into Wiz, they see only the things that they're working with. They may not see the other things at the company. So yes, identity, going back to identity, core of everything. Like if you don't do a good job there, it's just it's really hard to do a good job with anything.
And I know I'm talking to a real security, at least IAM engineer when someone brings up SCIM. SCIM provisioning allows you to bring your groups from a IAM, an IDP, and send them to an SP or a service provider and have them be consumed so that I can make my decisions of what access you have more granular than yes or no. I can actually give you lots of group access from one central point, and I would take SCIM, then JIT, or nothing. No, I am a SCIM guy. We brought in 67 applications, of which about 20% were SCIM capable, but it really does get magical, and it's 6.7 in CIS, Centralized Access Control, in that conversation. So, Ryan, man, it's been awesome having you here. I don't think you realize how quick it goes by, but here we find ourselves at the end of this. You know, one big thing, if you could leave people, and I'll challenge you to come up with it, I have in my mind, what's the one big thing you want people to take away from this episode, kind of no matter where they sit, if they're in security or building something cool?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway from my perspective is managing cloud infrastructure is really hard, and don't discount the hard work that you put into it. It's a really complex area to work in. There's a lot of different caveats. It's difficult to explain things to people, and fighting for the right tools. And there's a lot of open source tools out there too that we can throw out there at some point. But using these tools and understanding that you will be no expert alone, and you need certain tools to go look at things, and that's okay, is important. So I'll just say, like, to all my other cloud friends out there, like, it's hard, and acknowledge that it is hard. And these tools help make it a little bit better experience for you, and find a way to use them, because it's just much better for your life.
You mean to tell me, Ryan, that like Lego blocks that you can morph at will and connect to all kinds of other stuff at the speed of internet connectivity could be hard to manage at scale? You're blowing my mind right now. This is just wild talk right now. No, I tease. I would say my one big thing, and then we'll close it out, is ultimately, to exactly Ryan's point, it is hard, but it is also at the exact same time extremely scalable because of its normalization. Because even though there's a big broad breadth of ways you can connect, SaaS bucket, I can use API for this, I can do an agent here, I can do, because there's all that. At the same time, it's also very normalized. I know what an API key looks like. I know what access roles are. I understand how they interact. So it allows you to use these types of machine learning and other models to be really effective at this. And so my point is, I guess my one big takeaway is just start where you are, right? Like if you are building a product and selling it to people and you make code that you are not dealing with these things as an ISV or a vendor, you need to start where you are and start building, to your point, this chicken and the egg of my alert pipeline versus how I'm going to manage it and gather those posture things and how I'm going to get them to the right places. Like if you're not tackling those things, my one big takeaway is this is your golden opportunity. We all know our software sucks. We all know that everywhere is dealing with these challenges. And if you're simply getting started now, that is the place to start. And you cannot hire Ryan. That's not available. So, sorry. But other than that, figure it out. Thank y'all for being here. Ryan, you rock. Thanks for being here, brother.
Yeah, thanks a bunch.
All right. I guess I got to close this thing out as well. So I will say thank you for watching. I really love the times when I get to actually just show off the awesome people doing the work in our organization that are thinking about these things, that are actually out there having to solve the hard problems that we all have to deal with. So for me, it lets me just get my nerd on and be really excited. I also will say it was quite validating having somebody else talk about the identity centrism that we're in that, in my opinion, it very much justifies what I've spoken about before, which is we used to look at security from the beeps and the boops and the alerts. We need to start focusing on it from the identity's access, the context, the understanding of those things, and then the beeps, boops, and alerts and how they apply to that. And Ryan's got a great example of driving that forward from that perspective. I do not have a guest listed for next week. It'll be myself and Dom, and we're going to get into something nerdy. I'll share it with you later. Thank you for being here. See you next week, same time, same place.